welcome back. Our second conversation this morning is the effective development of a national sports system. And so with that, we have with us the National Sports Coordinator at the National Sports Council, Kaya Katus. We also have Director of the National Sports Council, Ian Kal, and Dr. Peter Davis. He's from the Apex Global Support Group. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning.
So we're discussing the national sports system. First of all, explain to us what that is and what it seeks to entail in terms of moving sports forward in this country.
Well, Isani, good morning, and thank you once again to you and Marlene for having us on the show this morning. The purpose is for us to mainly explain what we are doing at the National Sports Council and the purpose of Dr. Davis' visit to Belize and at the National Sports Council as well. We have been very busy, actually, quite busy at the National Sports Council these couple of months as we lead to bringing back sports into Belize. So we call it return to play. Over the past months, we have been visiting and meeting with various sporting associations and federations to ensure that, one, they have their COVID protocols in place, and two, to build that relationship, to strengthen that relationship back again with the National Sports Council. It is important because we're all in the same business, which is sports. Now, what we have been doing is that we have been wanting to strengthen back the way we do things at the National Sports Council, and that is why we have Dr. Davis with us to assist us in developing a strategic plan, but at the same time, he will be meeting with all federations and all associations in the days ahead to ensure that when we move together.
So, sports has been rather slow to return in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, we're only just seeing that permission has been, or authority has been given to some of the disciplines to be able to reopen. In the context of COVID-19, what are we looking at in terms of the continued or the return to some of the various disciplines, Ian?
Well, as you know, we have engaged in a phased approach. The first phase, which we are in right now, is that non-contact can play, they can practice, but contact sports can only practice. So there's no play in there. No competition is allowed. However, it all depends on how we can handle the sports at this moment. We are looking at a 3-month phase, so maybe by August 1st, we could see we're going into the second phase where contact sports can now start to play. I can say pretty much that it's looking very positive for August 1st, for us to be able to open back sports in that area. However, we have been noticing a lot of recreational sports happening across the country as well, which we are not there yet, but it is kind of difficult for us to be able to monitor that aspect of the recreational sports in different areas around the country. However, when it comes to the National Sports Council side, what we are doing is that we are monitoring our facilities, our areas. That is why we engage the federations and associations to ensure that they have all of these things in place for them to transcend back to their people, to their sporting disciplines.
Let me shift over to Kaya for a second here. Now, Kaya, you wear two hats. You're with the National Sports Council. You're also with the Belize City Council as well.
And an athlete.
And well, 3 hats if that were the case, right? And an athlete as well. Share with us your perspective on all of this, because I believe that one of the mandates of the City Council is to also be able to promote and encourage sports and sportsmanship in the city, correct?
Definitely so, Isani. From the perspective of the National Sports Council, the phased approach that the ministry has taken is definitely a great one, because it gives us time to slowly get back into things with the restrictions that are in place. There are certain protocols that we need to follow, and each sport has their own. I believe that each federation or each organization, each event planner who decides to have a sporting event, if these protocols are followed properly, we should go through the first phase with no problem and easily transition into phase 2. And by the beginning of next year, we should be fully back to where we were before COVID protocols came into place.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bring Dr. Peter into the conversation and talk about Apex and the model that you have. Firstly, tell us what your analysis of the Belizean sporting landscape has revealed.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me onto the show, and it's great to be back in Belize. I was here about 5 or 6 years ago, working with some federations and the Olympic Committee to build strategic plans. And so this trip back this time, I had enough conversations with federations to find out exactly where things stand right now. So what I'm talking with the Sport Council is about how to build a more effective national system. Not just chasing a medal or having an event, but it's the whole system, the complex thing. And there are a lot of different moving parts of that. It's difficult to pull them all together and integrate them. So at the moment, until I start meeting with sport federations today, and I'll meet with the National Sport Council and the Olympic Committee later this week. And so we'll start to build a picture of where things have progressed since the last time, and what needs to happen to really put sports on the map in Belize.
Yeah. Now, there are two things that you're talking about. You say developing sports, and very often what we have focused on is on pushing athletes. How critical is it? What would you say is one of the first steps if we want to take sports serious in this country? What's one of the first things we have to get on our priority list?
I think there needs to be strong school programs, strong development programs, strong clubs. And so you need to build that base. You need to have more people involved in sport, not just to produce high performance athletes at the top, but just so more people are involved in sport and physical activity and health related programs. It's just good. It's good for the country, good for health and medical status of the country. And so it's really hard to say this one's more important than that one, or should do this program or that program. It's really a totally integrated and aligned, an effective system's totally integrated and aligned. And so we want to make sure that the development side, the athlete development side, the family sport are all connected, and that high performance, good results in high performance come out of that. But it's really it's an integrated. It should be a well integrated system.
You know, as I see the video scroll of our volleyball team, or female volleyball team especially, it's such a great example of proving what sports advocates have been saying for such a long time, that we have to work with children to build them into not just sports enthusiasts, but professional athletes. And when we saw their stellar performance, and I'm talking about the female volleyball team, it was not overnight pulling together a team. It was a group of little girls that grew up to become professional players. Now, that takes resources. In a developing country where there are many competing priorities, how do you get a functional sports system in place with the realities of the economic situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I work with different countries. I work with some of the big wealthy countries, and I work with some of the small poorer countries where there are economic difficulties. And it's always a challenge to say, listen, we need a chunk of money for sport because someone else needs it for education, someone else needs it for defense or health or whatever it is. And I think the way forward, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself with the Sport Council here because we still have more meetings, but I think the way forward is really it's to bring the education department, the health department, the sports sector together so that they're an integrated system. So, the money invested in sport will have payoffs in education. The money invested in sport will have payoffs in health and the well-being of the country. And so if you look at it as an isolated sector of funding, it's less exciting and less return on investment than if you look at it as a combined resource. And so sport is part of education, it's also part of health. And so you're getting return on investment in multiple ways. So and you don't have a lot of money to spend on different things, and Belize doesn't have a lot of money to spend on sport, but that even a small investment will have a big return on investment. And so you start small and then start to build up.
From there.
And then the other thing I'd say is there are lots of funding models in the world. Some is just straight government sponsorship, some is lottery sponsorship, lottery money going to sports and arts and education, some of it's private investment, and some countries are completely private investment. So I think there's also the merit in looking at different combinations of the different funding sources and not just 100% on government.
It is interesting because for whatever reason in Belize, we've always looked at sports as in isolation from everything else. You look at education and you look at sports, and for whatever reason it's being treated differently. More so the idea of synchronizing the Ministry of Health into this entire framework. Yeah. That too, in my opinion, requires a lot of will and a lot of planning to have that kind of synchronicity, Doc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's, like I said, we often treat sport as just a game, but it's an important sector. It's important for tourism, it's important for health, it's important for education. So if we can bring all of those together, there's a better chance of getting the funding that you need and a better chance of getting a better result versus just thinking of it just, people playing games.
Yeah.
So it's a very important sector. It's a very important part, not just of the health and education, but also the national pride, the culture of activity, the culture of success. That has benefits all the way down the road.
Yeah, it is a rethink. It's a rethink of kids playing a game with a ball versus developing important tools for life, from the discipline that it takes to the determination that comes with following through. Kaya, these are all things you have been championing for years as a professional cyclist. Let me hear your take as to now being in part of the leadership in how sports will move forward in Belize. And while there aren't sports ongoing, it is a opportune time to get the plans in gear.
Definitely, Marlene. I've been at the National Sports Council for the better part of 10 years. And recently, I've been given the opportunity to sit at the decision-making table. And coming from the perspective of an athlete and knowing what it takes and what we need to give to especially our primary school kids, who the National Sports Council is mandated to ensure that they are taken care of as it relates to sports, I am overjoyed to be able to have the opportunity to be able to give back in a way like this. The programs that we offer to our primary schools, some might see it as just competitions, but in these competitions, we are actually preparing for the future. The thing leading up to the competitions we host annually for the 5 different disciplines, which are volleyball, basketball, football, softball, and track and field. These are actually preparing our youths for more sports in the future. And in the past, we have always looked at sport, as Dr. Davis said, as just a game. And it's not just that. There's a whole lot more. I mean, we can make careers, we can make a living, we can actually be a lot more, get a lot more, achieve a lot more from being an athlete. Yeah. I think I'm a living example of that.
Yeah, and be healthier, because we can't miss that part of it as well, where countries across the world are fighting an epidemic of overweight and obesity, even in children. The appeal of sports or even training for a sport is one that can get us healthier. Let me step back for a moment, because you spoke of primary school competitions, but outside of the school system, Ian, maybe you can weigh in on this one. The working with federations is a critical part, and Belize has a unique structure because the federations don't necessarily fall under the government's purview, but they do have a lot of control as to how they spend the resources they do get, whether it'll be invested in training athletes or building bleachers, and so I wanted to get into how you foresee the future of that collaboration. Is Ian
that for Ian?
Ian, are you still with us?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, just like to step back a little bit on the discussion just now when it pertains to the importance of sports and the young people, especially schools. in the meetings we're having with the Ministry of Education, we have identified that this was an issue. It is an issue. And what we need to do now is incorporate PE, physical education, as part of a more standardized curriculum now. What the ministry is saying is that, one, we need to give it importance, and two, it's not just PE as usual. What COVID has taught us is that sports is important, and true health as well, it is important. So what we are doing is that we're ensuring that when it comes to physical education in the schools are more standardized, and ensuring that our coordinators can come in and teach and get people, these teachers or per se or coaches certified in this specific discipline. I will give you a perfect example of what we're doing with the Football Federation of Belize. Is that one, it's a huge program that is coming into the country, which they call football for schools, or a football for every child. What the FFB will be doing is they will be funding these through the Ministry of Education and the National Sports Council to ensure that every school, if they have a coach or if they have a teacher, is certified and is able to teach that discipline from the onset. How to kick a ball, how to bounce a ball. So what we will be doing is using FFP as a model to ensure that, to see how it will work, then we can transcend that to all other sporting disciplines, like Kaya mentioned, basketball, softball, volleyball. This is what we will be using as a model for CA, to ensure that whenever we go into the schools, it is more of a curriculum and is taken more serious, and not just a kid given a ball and just recess time.
Let's go back to August 1st. You've mentioned that more or less that is when sports will resume to some extent. Give us a detail or a breakdown, if I may, of what can be expected a few weeks from now leading up to August 1st.
Well, the second phase would include contact sports with 50% fan base. At this point, we are at 0 fan base. On August 1st, after contact sports comes in, it will be one, they can compete now. FFB has been seeking permission to compete now. Other disciplines have been asking permission to compete now. So on August 1st, once that the OK is given, and depending on where we are with COVID, we should see the commencement of contact sports, but with 50% fan base. If everything goes well after in the next 3 months after August 1st, then at the end of the year, we should see 100% fan base and sports coming back to normal in Belize.
So if we're looking at two primary disciplines that draw the biggest crowds, you're looking at soccer, and you're also looking at basketball. You have the FFB and all its various leagues. You have the NABL and its program of events as well. So we're looking at 50% at the FFB Stadium, for argument's sake, and 50% at the city center, a scenario like that?
Yes.
50% of the capacity of any facility.
So let's bring the conversation back to the way forward. Dr. Davis, talk to us about what, in recognizing changes or strategies that have to be put in place, a part of it is also seeing the benefits or the rewards in the end. What would you say are some of the key benefits that can happen if we do have a proper strategic national sporting plan?
I would say the things that you would probably look at the most would be things like percent of participation in different age groups of children, families, adults. The longer term, you start to see a decrease in chronic diseases like heart disease or diabetes or obesity, things like that. But at the first level is really just to get more people more active and trying different sports, having access to sports, things like that. So the first instance is just participation, in my opinion. The second thing would be you would, if you have a two-pronged approach with participation and high performance levels, you just start to see some good results in major events that Belize competes in, like the Central American Games, the Central American Caribbean, Pan American Games, and maybe even the Olympics. And I know you do have some athletes competing in Tokyo this year. So we'll be looking for that. Obviously, there'll be, the impact of whatever the Sport Council does now, it'll be a long time coming, but you have some athletes competing on the international stage, and so you'd see more people participating and better results at the top end internationally.
All right. So tell us how this plan or this planning phase moves forward.
Right now? You mean for this week or
yes,
moving
week.
Forward? Well, I'm having meetings with different federations just to find out, what things have changed since last time and where they're at in terms of their major barriers or their strategic plan. I'll be doing presentations on tonight and Thursday night on the elements of an effective sports system to federations and coaches and maybe teachers and others, and I believe some athletes perhaps. So we'll be starting off with just reviewing what's important for an effective national system, and then we'll start to meeting with Sport Council, having a look at the national sport policy, having a look at what their programs are, and so starting to put the pieces in place to have a more long-term plan to work with federations, to work with government, to work with schools, to build those elements. The elements of athlete pathways, the elements of talent identification, the elements of coaching development, coach education. So all the things that need to happen, we need to map them out carefully and make sure the different stakeholders are involved at the right level, and start to put a long-term plan in place.
And Marlene, to elaborate on that, one of the things I'd like to stress on is the fact that the Ministry of Sports, through the National Sports Council, has come with a new vision, and we are doing things differently. And you can see this through this initial step in bringing Dr. Davis to work through our national federation. So we're not trying to work from the top down, we're trying to work from the bottom up. It's a new approach, and I believe this time, under the leadership of the Honorable Kevin Bernard, it's definitely going to be a great one.
Okay.
All right, well, thanks a lot, guys, and we certainly look forward to August 1st to the resumption of sports and 50% attendance. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Sonny.
For having us.
All right, so we now
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. We now go to our commercial break, and when we return is to discuss the election and the convention that was held over the weekend by the National Government Council. Stay tuned.